Pricing is a belief. You either believe that your price is not worth what you're asking, or you're able to convey that your price is worth it to your prospect, your buyer, but price is absolutely a belief. You choose which belief you want.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle, now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
I mean, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the fungible relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and our guest today is Bryan Whittington. And here are three things you want to know about Bryan before we start. He is the founder of EBS Growth. He hosts the Talent, Sales, and Scale podcast, and he was a sales trainer for over 10 years. That's got to be a rough job. Welcome, Bryan.
Hey, thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. And you're going to have to check out Mark. He's on the Talent, Sales, and Scale podcast coming up here. I don't know whenever that episode is going to drop, but it's going to be a good one.
Good. Well, hopefully, probably before this one. So look in the history. So, Bryan, I always start with this question, and it doesn't quite fit you, but pretend it fits you and go with it.
All right. I do that all the time. Let's go.
How did you get into pricing?
How did I get into pricing? So it's fundamental to sales, right? So whenever you're in sales, so as in sales, how you get to price is critical, because pricing is a strategy that if you can get somebody to align with your belief of what your value is, you take the idea of price from a commodity to price being something that you can reveal value. Price is absolutely a commodity where if you're going to buy me for a nickel, then you'll get rid of me for a nickel. And so we always want to move away from price and over to value. And that's one of the key requirements or key skills I would say that you need from a salesperson.
All right. So I'm sure you and I agree completely on what you just said, but the words that you chose are really horrendous in my world, if that's okay, right? So anyone who says price is a commodity, I think what you're really saying is salespeople who choose to sell price have essentially made their products a commodity.
Agreed. So better said there. Yes.
Okay. And so I think of price, my definition of price is how do you capture value? It's the thing that captures the value of your product. And so if you're going to treat your product like a commodity, then you get the price that everybody else gets.
Yeah, because if you're going to sell just on price, you might as well just put everything online and be an order taker. That's not sales. Sales is how do you identify what their challenges are, whether or not you can solve that problem of those challenges, and then understand the value of you fixing those problems for that organization will be, and you can charge an appropriate value for it, which, yes, that's price. But if I'm just going to say, hey, my widget is blankety blank dollars, that is a pricing. You're a commodity now. You haven't driven any value to that conversation, and you haven't allowed that person to realize your value over somebody else's.
Yeah. And we agree 100%. I also often tell a story of how a professor of mine in an MBA program asked us all to take out a piece of paper and write our names and then give ourselves a grade for how well we did in the class. And he goes, if I agree with you, you can have it. And if I don't agree with you, you don't get it. And I think of pricing as almost the exact same thing, right? So if you think about how well did I design and define and market and sell and communicate the value of the product, that's what dictates the price. Just like my grade, the price is like a grade for how well we do everything else. And the sales side is the very end of that.
Yeah, and maybe the way that I would couch that is, so for example, if I'm on a discovery call, and so we don't get into semantics here, you're going to have to do discovery throughout. So that first time appointment where I'm diving deeply into that conversation, Mark, I'm calling that an exploratory or discovery call, whatever you want to call that. But my ideal goal of that is to do a couple of things. One is identify, do they have a problem that I can solve? And if I can't, then I'm going to go away. And then if I can find a problem for which what I'm doing can solve, then I'm going to identify how they're doing it today and then get them to identify how big of an issue it is and then get them to quantify that issue. And from that quantification of the cost of that issue, that's where I can then start to have those value conversations.
Yep. Oh my gosh, you just wrote my book. Thank you. Brian,
You're welcome.
that was so well done. That's exactly what I put in there. So let's talk about this. You have that first time call. What's the question? So you just come out and say, hey, what problems do you have?
No. And the other thing that you never want to say is, hey, what's your pain? Right? Don't ever ask that. I couch this in a couple of different ways. So if we look at that initial exploratory call, I'm going to get them to give me the premise. Hey, what's the objective of today's conversation? You're walking away. This is a good use of your time if you've learned what or have gotten what away from this. So I get the end goal in mind, and then I'm going to reverse engineer it from there. So that starts the objective of the conversation. Go ahead.
Right. So that's the end goal of the conversation, not of our whole sales relationship.
Precisely. Just of that conversation, because I mean, how many times have we gone on sales calls, or I'll admit it, how many times have we run bad sales call where the objective didn't meet whatsoever what I had in mind for them or what they had in mind for me? So the first thing I want to do is make sure that we have an alignment of what's the objective of the call. And then based upon that, now I can couch the remainder of my questions to achieve that goal. But before I can really get that done, I need to find out how are they doing blank today. So whatever that blank is in your world. So for example, if I'm selling my recruiting services for salespeople, hey, curious, how do you go about hiring salespeople today? Or if it's for top of the funnel work that we do on another platform that we have, then it's, hey, curious, do you use the phone for any outbound prospecting today? And if yes, any idea of what your call to connect rate is and how that's impacting your meetings booked per month, right? So that's going to start it. And now I get them to lay out a picture of what their as is today. So that's step number one, is really to get them to paint the picture of their as is today.
Yeah. So before we move beyond the as is, I want to take a step back.
Yeah.
You had to get the sales call in the first place. And
Yes.
I assume in the act of getting a sales call, you set some expectations, or the potential buyer has some expectations. How did we do that?
That's a great question. So we want to find pain back in that conversation. So if I'm reaching out to you, Mark, it would be something along the lines of, hey, Mark, Bryan Whittington, listen, you and I haven't spoken before. Do you mind if I take half a minute, share with you the purpose of my call? Sure. Got it. Hey, speaking of a number of different CEOs, one of the biggest challenges that they're sharing with me is their sales team is not setting enough meetings per month. And oftentimes that's because they're not having enough sales conversations. So I'm curious, Mark, ever face that relevant conversation to have today? Yeah, absolutely. Now I dig down a little bit more deeply, Mark, and I'll say something along these lines. I call it my magic 3 questions. So Mark, can you tell me a little bit more about that? Can you be more specific? Can you give me an example of one of your salespeople today that hasn't hit their meetings booked per month? And they'll give me that. All right. Now, out of curiosity, because your sales team isn't hitting that, this is question number 2. Out of curiosity, because your sales team isn't hitting that meetings booked per month, or you've had turnover or whatever that pain is that you're solving for, because of that, what? Now they start to give me an impact, right? And I'm not giving them that impact. They're giving me that impact. And then the third question, to make sure that this is going to be a relevant, good use of both of our times, my third magic question is this. Well, hey, with or without my help, Mark, is this something that you need to get solved? Yeah, absolutely. I need to get this solved. Then I go to my call to action. Well, why don't we do this? And I'm going to be embedded commands. Why don't we do this? Or let's do this. Or may I make a suggestion? Why don't we do this? However that comes out. And then we set up that appointment for a conversation. So that's the language that I use in order to book that meeting. And that conversation should take anywhere between 5 to 8 meetings, or 5 to 8 minutes, excuse me. And if it's longer than that, you've already started your initial first sales call, and I wouldn't suggest you do that.
Okay. So I have to ask, why wouldn't you suggest we do that? I've got him on the phone. He's interested.
Yeah. So 2 things. One is, if it's easy enough or relevant enough, meaning that you can have a 1 call close, you might want to continue on. And if you do that, it would sound like this. Well, Mark, we're starting to get into a little bit about what we'd have, what we talk about on our conversation. You weren't expecting a call from Bryan Whittington today at 12:35 your time. So do you have a couple of minutes that I can dive down a little bit more deeply? Maybe, a total of 10 to 15 minutes. You good with that right now? If he says no, then I'm going to schedule a conversation. If he says yes, now we're going to have a dialogue. If I don't do that, the whole entire time, Mark is going to be asking himself, hey, how long is this going to take? And doing everything in his power to disqualify me. So it's a game of gotcha at that point. Whereas if I set a meeting with you, you have it on your calendar. When I call you back that next time, it's the weirdest thing, but there is such a different tenor, tone, environment when I call back, because now he's expecting it, and that it's just a lot easier. Now you and I can have a business dialogue as opposed to playing the game of gotcha the other angle. So that's why I suggest, if you can, especially if you're on a complex sale, set up that next meeting.
I love that feedback. I think that's really interesting because obviously from my perspective, and I think you agree, the goal here is I want to find out how much value my solution to your problem has to you. Right. And if I can open up their mind to say, let's talk about value, or let's talk about the value of solving the problem, and not how do I get this guy off the phone, then it just changes the conversation. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. And if you think about it, I'm just calling you out of the blue. I'm a stranger. You don't know me, so you're going to be a little bit more guarded. However, if we come back, now you've likely looked at my LinkedIn, you've probably looked me up on my website, or you've done a little bit of due diligence before you jump on a call. So now whenever I start to ask you really challenging questions, like, hey, listen, looking at your sales team today, how many of those, knowing what you know today, would you rehire? I can ask questions like that during a deep conversation as opposed to off of a cold call. I may be able to pull that off, but I'm going to get a much better answer on a scheduled call than otherwise.
Right, because the person you're talking to went into this conversation thinking, hey, we're going to talk about this problem.
Yeah. I can trust this person. This is going to be a business conversation, not a sales pitch.
Oh, absolutely.
Which, by the way, if you're doing a sales pitch or a demo right off the bat, you're screwing up. But that's a different story.
I absolutely love that. That is brilliant. Okay, so we went through step one. What was step two?
Step two. So in a discovery call. So that way, now I've gotten them to paint the picture. Now I get them to identify 1 to 10. It would sound something like this. So, Mark, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is, oh my gosh, this is just a disaster, which, by the way, I'm not hearing that. At 10 is angels singing from above, hallelujah. And now I'm going to lay out exactly what utopia would look like if they're working with me. So it would be like, now, Mark, your sales team is having a conversation every 3 to 5 dials. They know that they're going to be able to book a meeting every, 1 to 2 meetings every 12 conversations. They're doing that at will. That's a 10. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, and let me be a pain in the neck, you can't choose 7. Where are you at?
Okay, why can't I choose 7? I just have to know.
Because so think of a teenager. How you doing today? Meh. That's a 7, right? I can't do anything with a meh because I don't know if it's a good or a bad. If they say 8, 9, or 10, I know things are decent. If they say 6 or below, I know that there's a problem there. So I'm going to have a different answer depending on where they are, but almost everybody will want to choose 7 because it's safe, and I need to get them to either say it's good or it's bad, it's positive or negative. I can't have a meh.
Oh my God. I got to say that I'm learning stuff that I've never heard before, and I'm old.
I've been doing this a couple of days.
Yeah, a couple of days. Okay, so was there a step 3?
Yeah, so after I get that person, so Mark says, yeah, pick a number.
Obviously, I'm a 5.
Okay, 5. You know what, Mark? Number one answer I always hear. I'm going to agree with you and say, attaboy, that's the number one answer I get, right? So, hey, out of 5, fully anticipating that's the number one answer. Kind of out of curiosity, why a 5? Now I get Mark to justify why it's a 5. Oh, I didn't think it sounded that bad. Why a 5? Now it's your number and you're fighting me. No, it is a 5. It's that bad. All right, you win. Right? So now Mark owns that fully and it's not my number. And then once I get a little bit of information, I believe him now that he truly believes it's a 5. I say, okay, knowing it's a 5, what are the top, say, 2, 3, 4 things that you believe has to happen to get you closer to a 10, knowing full well it's never going to be likely a 10, but what are maybe the 3, 4, 5 things that you believe are most important to get you to that 10? Now, what he's going to do is give me a list of everything that he believes he needs to do for the solution. So he's going to now give me his vision of solution. And so he's going to say, well, I'm going to do this. Okay, what else? I think this would be important. What else? This. Now notice I'm saying what else as opposed to anything else. It's what else, what else, what else. Say, got it. Okay. And now I'm going to repeat back to him to confirm that I have everything. So you need to do this, 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 and this, and this. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Is that right? Yes, that's right. I do a little bit of Chris Voskett of that's right. And they said, of those 5 things, if you could only solve one, which do you think would be the most important? And now I get them to prioritize. Then. And at this point, my discovery call time is almost up. So I'm going to say, hey, would it be helpful before we dive down into this if I share with you at least a high level, a little bit about what we do, how we do it, and based upon that, we can come back and schedule another conversation, right? So that's if I have a more complex enterprise type sale, or if I have more of a not a commodity, but more of a transactional short sales cycle, I'm going to condense this, do it a lot more quickly. So depending on the complexity of what you're doing, always know what that next step should be and pace this, ask those questions to align with that. So I don't know if I explained that to a point of clarity, but I do want to point out that it's not a one size fits all. It really depends on size of your sale, complexity of all that buyer's group. Is it 1 person, 5 person, 10 people? That's going to really determine how you play that last part out for the next step.
Yep. That was actually really fascinating. Now, I work with many, many different people inside companies. And one of the groups I work with sometimes are product managers.
Right.
And product managers, when I ask them to go out and talk to customers and potential customers, I caution them because a customer is going to say to you, I want this feature, right? Can you build me this feature? And I always tell them that's the wrong thing to look for, right? Instead, what you want to look for is, well, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Because when they're giving you the feature, they're giving you the solution. Now, what I just heard you talk about was you're asking this potential buyer, so what are the top 3 or 4 solutions to the problem? I use my words, not yours, right?
Yep.
And so how do we reconcile the fact that I'm going to ask a buyer for solutions where I would never ask a buyer from a product development perspective about the solutions?
So here's where I'm going with that. What I'm trying to do, so consider this from a top of the funnel prospecting, early discovery, early exploratory call, right? Where I have a limited constraint on time, say 20, 30 minutes, and I have to go through this whole entire process. What I'm looking to do is now I have that list of 1 to 5 items that we need to dive down more deeply on. But that at least gets them to open up that I do have a problem and we'll need to come back again to really dive down deeply. Now, whenever we come back again, or even during that topic, I'll say, okay, Mark, well, you said that you had problem 1. You only have a 3 to 5% connect rate. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? Why is it, how long has that been a problem? And now I'm going to ask more clarifying questions to get at the root cause of it, to find out, hey, what is the root cause? Because often the problem that the person brings you is never really the problem. We have to identify the real root cause to know whether or not your solution will work. If your solution won't work for that root cause, then make an introduction to somebody where it will. Now that person is going to become your biggest evangelist. But if you just try to fix that top of mind problem, you're probably going to get the wrong solution and have an angry person on your hands. So I don't know if that helped clarify it a bit.
I think it does. And I think the other thing, as you were talking, and I had a chance to think about those words and the previous ones, I think what often happens is that people think in solutions, they don't think in problems.
Right.
And so if I ask a customer what solutions they think might solve it, then it's much easier for them to answer than to say, what are the root causes of the problems, or what else causes that, or
because it's really a process to work them down, right? Because if they identify the root cause, then in my mind, I almost have an NCAA Sweet 16 bracket going in my head, right? So if they say, well, I don't think my sales team is effective. Okay, well, that could be for one of a couple of reasons. Is it they're not effective because they're not doing the activities, or they're doing the activities, they're just not very good at it? And now I can benchmark, if they say it's this, okay, so you said it's because they're not doing the activities. Is it because they don't have the tools, or they don't have the talent or the belief that it will work? Well, I don't think that they have the talent. Okay, so now I can just go A, B off of that. It's like whenever you go to the eyeglass place, right? Yep. So is it better now or now? And you can just ask those questions. So you're guiding the conversation through questions. It's not pitching. Yep. It's laser guided questions to help them uncover the problem and get down to the root cause. So now they go, wow, I hadn't ever really considered that. So it's not necessarily I have a training issue. It's really the fact that they're just simply not having enough conversations in a day. That might be it. Let me make the suggestion. Let's test that. Now I can go on to the next phase because we're at the likely root cause problem.
Right. And what I like about that, and what I often talk about and think about as well, is we as salespeople need a long list of what are the possible problems that we're looking for. Right? What are the problems that we could possibly solve that I want someone to say, I've got this problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the beauty of it, because if you know the problems that you solve, then you can reverse engineer that NCAA bracket to go to what are the in medical terms, right? What are the presenting symptoms? So if I can identify what the most common presenting symptoms are, now I can reverse engineer from those presenting symptoms to my likely solution that's going to cause or fix it at a root cause. And if I can do that, then I'm bringing tremendous value to my prospective prospect.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. Okay, so hard question for you. When do you put a dollar value on the solution to the problem? Not the product that we're selling, on the solution to the problem.
I do that as early as possible. So if I can do that on a discovery call, worst case on that second call, right? So and I'm going to say, well, let me back up even further. Oftentimes, people don't know how to identify what the cost of that is. So I, as a salesperson, have to be really good at identifying that. So it might be things like, well, Mark, kind of curious, how are you measuring success today? Okay, so if that's what you're measuring success today, what would you like it to be? And then I get that gap. And then I start to figure out what the value of that gap is. And then I ask, is that a repeat customer? Is there a value of that gap over time, or is that a one-time incident? So now I know value of the gap. What's that value of the gap over time? And then before I say, oh my gosh, it's a $2.3 million problem, I don't want to get excited. Yeah. So, well, I went to public school, right? How much is that? Make them do the math so they own the problem. And they go, listen, I don't want to pretend to know your world better than mine. Or I don't want to pretend to know your world better than you do. I mean, 2.3, is that a big issue, little issue? I don't know what some of the other problems are that you're facing, right? Because oil and gas, $2.3 million might be like nothing. Whereas for a software company, maybe that's a ton of money, right? You never know. So ask them the question, 2.3 million. I mean, is that a big deal, little big deal? How's that compare to some of the other initiatives that you're working on? Let them tell you. Don't, paint their own picture. Let them paint it for you.
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, we're going to be running out of time, so we got two more things we have to do real fast.
Look out.
We're going to start by pricing table topics. So for our listeners, you've heard this before, but Bryan has 1 minute to talk about whatever this card is that I'm about to draw for him. And actually,
now, he did not prep me for this, so I have no idea what this question is. So, all right, let's see if my improv class has paid off.
He has no idea. You get to talk between 1 and 2 minutes. I'll let you know when your 1 minute is up. And by the way, this is the 2 of clubs from my selling value playing deck. You ready, Bryan?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Okay. Salespeople use every tool available to close a deal. When given authority to discount, they will use it more often than necessary.
And I'm supposed to do pro or con of that? Or
whatever you want to say.
Okay. So if you give your salespeople the autonomy to discount, they likely will discount more often than not. And it's a negative opportunity for negotiation. So, for example, if I'm a sales leader and I want to give my salesperson autonomy to discount as needed, I still want them to be able to defer to me as a negotiating tactic. So if I said, Mark, listen, I don't know. Let me take that back and have a conversation. But a couple of questions, because I know my manager is going to ask me this. If we were able to do that, and I'm not saying we can, because we don't tend to discount, but let's pretend that I can. Would we move forward, or what would happen off of that? I get an answer back, yeah, we'd absolutely move forward. Okay, so other than price, you're suggesting that this is the only thing preventing you from moving forward. Yes, okay, got it. I'll ask him whether or not I can do that. Now, let's pretend I go to Mark and he says, no, I can't. What happens then? And I allow that silence to do the work. And if he says something like, then this is over. Okay, got it. I'll really work hard. Or it goes, I don't know, we'll just have to figure something else out. Meaning, if I can find some different terms to allow this to work, maybe spread this out over time or something like that, we could still make things work out. Yeah, we would just have to be a little bit more creative. Okay, got it. So I'll go back, talk to Mark, see what he says. Worst case scenario, you and I can put on our brainstorming caps to see how to make this work. Is that fair? Yes. So if you teach your people to do that and come back to you as opposed to just carte blanche discounting, that would be my suggestion on how to do it.
Beautiful. Okay, Bryan, a couple comments. First off, I feel like I was just buying a new car at a new car dealership.
Come on, man, you only gave me 2 minutes.
No. But that's how they do it when you go buy a new car, right? Oh, I got to go check with my manager. Now, I don't think they do the other part of the close, which was, so what if he says no? Right? I think they just come back with another number. And then the other thing I was going to say is you went almost 2 minutes, which is the most anyone's ever done on pricing table topics so far. So nice job. Nice job.
So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe I'm just verbose. But, now that you bring that up, maybe one thing to say is switch the order. Mark, let's pretend that I can't do that. What happens? I'm not saying that I can't, but let's pretend I can't. What happens? If you start with that negative and then go to the positive, that would be an interesting play at it. So yeah, but on the topic or on the spot, that would be my suggestion.
That was actually well done. And so Bryan, we will wrap it up with the final question. So what's one piece of pricing advice you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
Pricing is a belief. You either believe that your price is not worth what you're asking, or you're able to convey that your price is worth it to your prospect, your buyer, but price is absolutely a belief. You choose which belief you want.
Yes, and you're absolutely talking to salespeople. I often talk to product people, pricing people, and what I tell them, which is very similar, is sales must be confident they can win at your price.
Yes, because with that confidence, and that goes back to that belief. If I'm a salesperson and I believe, oh my gosh, there's not a better value out there, they're going to sell with conviction and confidence. If they don't believe in that price, they're dead in the water.
Yeah. Bryan, this has just been fabulous. Thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
Yeah, easiest way is I spell my name wrong on LinkedIn, but check it out. It's Bryan with a Y instead of an I, so Bryan Whittington. Check me out on LinkedIn, or you can also reach me through email. It's Bryan with a Y at ebsgrowth.com. And then check us out on the Talent, Sales, and Scale podcast, where you can hear Mark coming up here in a couple of weeks.
All right. Episode 191 is all done. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this, would you please leave us a rating and a review? The easiest way to do that is go to ratethispodcast.com/impact pricing. And I don't know why people make it so hard to figure out how to rate a podcast. So go to ratethispodcast.com/impact pricing. And finally, if you have any questions or comments about the podcast or pricing in general, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.